Let's see changes. Right. Welcome back to episode 236 of the Tallboy Radio podcast. And as we always say, who knows where it goes when the beer flows? Well, let me tell you this, it flows all the way to the USA once more, as we have a guest who's going to be joining us to tell us about his rather illustrious career. But before that, here's a man who's yet to have his illustrious career. How are you doing?
Evening all, evening the world. Yeah, thanks for that intro. As ever, with best friends like that, who needs enemies, I suppose. No, really looking forward to this episode. I say it most times when we have guests on our podcast, and particularly guests that are first timers. Really looking forward to just picking this guy's brains about his career and what he's seen, what he's got up to. So I say no doubt a few left turns along the way, and we'll see where we go.
Indeed. So then, over to our guest. I apologize if I pronounce your name wrong, as I so frequently do with people's names. Ramesh, how are you doing?
You got it perfect. I mean, after all, you guys live in England, where all the Indians are. So it's good to be with you guys. It's nothing like a tall boy in the middle of the day.
Well, 100%. Yeah, 100%. So you had you got a couple of careers. We'll get to those really, but obviously you've written a book recently called Badge, Tie and Gun: Life and Death Journeys of a Miami Detective. I have to say, whenever we get an author on the podcast, I will order the book and try and read it first. I've ordered yours, but unfortunately, it's not available on Amazon in the UK, but it is in the US. So it's making its way from the US as we speak, and I will share it out on our podcast channels when it arrives. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what you did, which departments you're in, and how you got into the police force?
Sure. Well, I got into the police force at a pretty early age. I was just a mere green lad of 21, and it was something that really wasn't in my thinking process until I was about 19 and a half. I started off with a small police department. It was a very, it was kind of like an inner city atmosphere. It was a very high crime area, so it was a great place to start your career as a uniformed patrol officer because there was never a dull moment. So after a year there, I left and went to another department, a slightly larger department. That's where I got interested in doing investigative work. I was watching some homicide detectives work, and I decided that's what I wanted to do. So I had to make yet another move because that police department didn't offer that kind of opportunity. So I went to our county, Miami-Dade County, which was a department of about, I think they're up to about 3,500 sworn officers now. And I was able to do a couple more years in uniform and finally got my coveted transfer to homicide.
Wow. It sounds exciting. When I picture that, I'm picturing Miami Vice and that kind of stuff. But is it that salubrious? Is that where everybody wants to be?
I don't think everybody wants to be in homicide. But when I chose to go into law enforcement, I really didn't realize what kind of a collision course I was going on because Miami was changing very drastically. The cocaine cartels were ramping up in a big way, and Miami was kind of transitioning from kind of a sleepy, fun kind of town where people, were engaged in boating and relaxing sports like that into a kind of a war zone. And it happened. It seemed to happen very, very quickly. So those of us who got into law enforcement at that time came out of the academy and hit the ground running.
Wow. Yeah, I bet.
No. I was just going to ask you. You said that you sort of made the transition basically from what we would call sort of Bobby on the beat, sort of walking the streets and so on. into more sort of investigative work. Did you miss it initially? Did you miss sort of being out on the street? Did you miss the sort of walk in the streets, doing the beat as such, or was it very, very easy decision for you to go into that investigative work?
No, I really didn't miss it. It was a pretty easy decision. I was very, very happy. I was thrilled when I got the notification that I was going to homicide. And you know, when you're working homicide or any other investigative entity like that, you're going to be out on the street, but in a different role, in a different realm. You're going to be knocking on lots of doors, talking to lots of people. So I cherish my days in uniform. I think, you know, everybody should spend at least 2 or 3 years in uniform before they choose to go to detectives.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine that is probably sort of where you learn probably learn about what the streets are all about. My question is then, you know, when you think about homicides, and I don't know about you guys, I watch a lot of sort of murder documentaries on TV, and I find them fascinating. Just it's a real insight into the human mind, and you know, and the different routes that it can take you down for one reason or another. I'd like to know what it's like. Well, I don't know if I want to know what it's like. Maybe from your version, not me experience it firsthand. What it's like walking into a crime scene, you know, where someone's life has been ended, and you know the worlds of their loved ones have changed, and whoever's perpetrated it, their lives changed as well for the worse. What's that like experiencing that?
Yeah, as you said, there's a lot of different things going on, right? And there's a lot of effects upon all the people involved. But as a detective, when you go on the scene, you're very keenly focused. You're very focused on what you need to do. You're kind of, you know, there's kind of this cheerleader inside of you saying, you know, let's get it right. Let's get everything right. Let's make sure we're not missing anything. And at the same time, somewhere along the line, your brain is processing what can be some pretty gruesome things and some pretty horrible things, right? So there's a lot to it. There is a lot to it, but you don't have time. It's kind of hard to explain. You don't really have time to sit there and cover your mouth and say, oh my God, look at this. This is horrible.
Yeah.
You know, you recognize it, but you also realize that you can't get overwhelmed by it. You have to be, you have to treat the bodies as evidence, and you have to just do the job and be diligent about what you're doing.
Yeah. And I suppose, you know, you hear the phrase a lot when you're watching things on TV, you know, right, the clock is ticking. So you go there and literally the clock, and I don't know the stats, and you might know the stats in terms of, you know, if you don't solve the crime within a period of time, 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, obviously your chance then of doing that decreases significantly, sort of thing. So I suppose it's one of those, is that it's a moment that you train for, and you think, right, all your training is put into play there. And one question I have, and is not quite, is there a playbook, but when you first go to the scene, is there like, I've got to check this, I've got to check this, I've got it, or is it literally just like you go into the scene and you let your eye cast around, and then you almost process and you go through, you know, what you think is the right thing? Or is it almost a bit like a playbook when, you know, you check for this and you check for this and check, and how does that work? I'm fascinated with that.
Yeah, it's a great question. There definitely is a procedure.
Right.
We're notified, we meaning the homicide detectives are usually notified by uniform. They get a call of a dead body or a shooting or whatever it may be. So our first order of business is to meet with them outside the crime scene and say, what do we got? Tell me what you saw. Tell me what you know. Have you spoken to neighbors? Do we have witnesses? What's going on? And we try and get kind of the lay of the land before we actually go in. And one of the things that was very helpful to us, that we're very fortunate to have, was a system where we worked on a squad. So you never went to a homicide scene by yourself. You had a squad of usually 3 other detectives working with you.
Right.
And in that way, you know, one of those people was going to be designated as the lead investigator. So, you know, let's say that, you know, the 3 of us are on that squad and I'm the lead, and I'm going to go, okay, Beans, I want you to start on the area canvas, and Gaz, I want you to help me with the scene. It's a big scene, or talk to that witness down the street, or whatever it is. So you start to divvy up the responsibilities and try and get things done more quickly. I mean, you never want to rush things, but as you said, you do have time is kind of your enemy.
Yeah.
So you want to try and get that lead sheet filled up with good things that you got to keep doing, and hopefully lead you to the pot of gold, as it were.
Right.
Wow. How many cases were you typically working at any one time?
Well, in the 80s, it was very, very busy, and we really didn't have adequate manpower, so we were working a lot. So I would say in 1985, when I got to homicide, we were getting about 31 to 33 homicides a month. That's one a day, and those had to be disseminated among several squads. So it was a rotational basis.
Yeah.
So we got one today. Now it's Squad B's turn, and they get one, and it's Squad C's turn. In the middle of all that, you have suicides and accidentals that we're responsible for handling.
Right.
So it got at times got almost chaotic, but we had good supervisors, we had a good system, and we worked a lot of overtime. We worked a lot of hours away from home to get these cases worked. So I worked hundreds and hundreds of cases because you always worked on your partner's case or your squad member's case also.
Yeah, wow, it's a lot, isn't it?
It is, and thank you, Stuart, for your question. And just a question that he's just asked: do you over time become desensitized when it comes to certain incidents? And I suppose that's a great question. If you do see, though, if you are subjected to the same experiences over, is there a desensitized sort of that you go through, and not you become blasé, because that's completely wrong phrase, but is it just that, right, I'm not going to be shocked anymore, I'm just going to go about the job?
Definitely. I mean, you can't work this job for even 6 or 8 months and not have some sort of desensitization, because it's not something that most human beings are prepared for. Even though you have a mindset of a police detective and all those things, it's a jarring thing sometimes to see a child dead, for example, or see just a completely innocent woman that was surprised by a robber laying on the floor of her kitchen, bleeding all over the place, and the groceries are spilled all over, and you go, my God, that's my wife or my mom or my sister. There's a very familiar look to these people that you go into their homes and see them dead. So yes, you definitely get affected. And there's two sides to that coin. It's necessary for you to be able to do your job. You have to have the protection, that layer of sensitivity turned off. And so I think everybody deals with it in a different way, but it does affect you. Absolutely does.
Yeah. And I suppose, as you say, you have to turn it off, because I suppose if you don't, then your objectivity might start to then not be where it needs to be, and you're not quite as focused on where you need to, because you're having all these thoughts about what you're actually visually seeing in front of you, and maybe the impact of that on X, Y, and Z. But from a detective point of view, you have to be so objective in what it is that you're trying to get to, because yes, somebody's lost their life, but actually you're then going to try and find out who that person was that did that, and so there's that objectivity, I suppose, what I'm getting to, and without turning off your sensitivity, you might not have that.
Correct. I mean, you have to remain objective. You have to guard against jumping to any conclusions. Some things might look like something. Somebody might tell you, "Oh, this is a suicide." It might not be. So you have to try and be very objective and just let the facts and the evidence take you where they're going to take you.
Yeah. Are there any cases that have stuck with you, though? You know what I mean? So you retire now. There must be cases that you think back on that you just can't shake, or maybe you didn't solve. I think every detective we've ever spoken to says there's that one case that he just couldn't solve that really bugs him.
Oh, absolutely. I think the first one that comes to mind for me was this man, 53-year-old man who was a co-owner of a heavy equipment company. They leased cranes and things like that to construction companies. And he was found shot in the back of the head in the trailer of his office trailer. So on the work premises where the company was. We worked that case very, very hard. and I developed what I believe is a suspect. I believe is the killer. The problem was we just couldn't build enough probable cause to legally arrest him. So that one always bothered me. I was very in touch with the widow in that case, and we actually became friends over the years. And my thing was, even when I retired, I called up the office and said, "Hey guys, pick this up and see if you can do something with it, because I would love to close this and get the goods on this guy before the widow passes away." But unfortunately, that never happened. And yeah, everybody has one of those or more than one of those.
Right. I mean, that must be hard. And that's, that was one of the questions. Obviously, I was going to sort of chat about was when you work in a case, because you see it on TV and you see these sort of obviously actors but portraying detectives, and they go to bed and they go to sleep and then they can't sleep. How much of that can you detach yourself? Because for me, it's like if I'm working homicide and I've got a murder case and it's a new case and would I be able to sleep? It's just things going over your mind. Have I missed something? Did I do it right? Is there anything else? Like, how do you shut off from that? And I'm not saying it's a 9-to-5 job, but how do you shut off from that? Because to me, that'd be like a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week thing until I solved it, and then you move on. How do you detach yourself from that?
It's not easily. And so that might be the reason why we cops have a very high divorce rate, high alcoholism rate, and it's tough. It's tough dealing with that, and it's different than uniform in the sense that when you work uniform, you go from go from call to call, and at the end of the day, you turn in your paperwork and you're done. Yeah. And the next day is a bunch of new calls you're going to go to. In homicide, as you said, you've always got unfinished business. You've always got leads to follow up on. You've always got these questions nagging you about are we doing it the right way, or have we done enough? Should I interview this guy, that guy? That's where I think it's helpful to know that when I go to work, I've got a squad of guys that I can bounce things off of, and we can help each other out with those questions. But yeah, it's hard.
Yeah. And I guess it helps, like you say, with the squad. You've got the same group of people going through the same thing, the same experiences, the same cases. So you've got people who know exactly how you're feeling. I bet you build some camaraderie then with those officers that you work with.
Oh yeah, some of the closest friends in my life are the guys that I worked with for those 22 years in homicide, and we consider each other brothers till the end. It really is not a corny thing to say, but we depend on each other so much, and we worked with each other in so many trying situations. And I can hop on a plane and go to Chicago and meet a homicide detective in Chicago, and there will be an instant familiarity there. Yeah, I may not even know the guy's name, but because we all do the same kind of work, and it's very unique work.
Yeah, it is. It is a very unique work. It's something I can't quite get my head around, guys. I don't know about you. It must be. Do you feel that level of responsibility that when you're trying to solve this for the loved ones? Do you feel that weighing on your shoulders?
For sure, 100%. You're working those cases really for the family members that are left behind, and that becomes crystal clear when you meet with them, because we're the ones that had to knock on the door and give them the bad news. We're the ones that had to sit there and deliver the bad news. And I'll tell you what, that's way more difficult than working a gory crime scene or a decomposed body. That's just physical unpleasantness. When you deal with these people and have to tell them this shocking news, and then kind of hold their hand through the whole thing, there's a bond that is created there too, hopefully, because sometimes they're your best source of information in many cases. So yeah, you do feel a sense of responsibility, and it's very satisfying when you hear a jury say, "We find the defendant guilty," and you see, they come up and give you a hug or say thank you. It means the world.
Yeah, that's amazing. So one of the things we often hear then about sort of horrific crimes like that is, and maybe I watch too many crime documentaries, I don't know, but you more often than not, it appears that the perpetrator is known to the victim. Is that the case?
That is the case most of the time. I think most homicides most homicides are done by people who aren't necessarily hardened criminals.
Yeah.
They're kind of everyday folks who have a lot of problems, maybe drug and alcohol problems. They have anger problems. They don't know how to resolve things without violence, and they let their emotions get the better of them. That's the majority of homicides. And yeah, you do have homicides that are created by hardened armed robbers and people like that, narcotics dealers. But for the most part, yeah, your average homicide subject is somebody that you wouldn't be able to pick out of a crowd necessarily.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
mad. That's mad.
One thing I was going to ask, and I've asked a couple of other sort of detectives that have been on. Have you ever been involved in a serial killer case, so as opposed to a almost a one-off? Has there been that serial killer, and you've had to effectively sort of chase them, track them down, and they've either committed a series of crimes over a number of months, or a number of weeks, or even a number of years? And if so, obviously without betraying any confidences or anything like that, just talk us through that process.
Yeah, well, once it becomes evident that we have somebody doing multiple murders over a period of time, everything goes into kind of high gear, and a lot more people become involved.
Right.
So, usually there's a task force that's formed with other agencies, like the state agency we have in Florida is the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, FDLE. They'll have their agents working on the task force. The FBI will always get themselves involved.
Right.
They've never met a camera they didn't like, and so they will definitely get involved. Hey, listen, there's a lot of great FBI agents I worked with. Okay, so, but that part is true, and so you'll have all of a sudden you'll have this big bureaucratic creature that's been formed, and there's a lot to manage that too, which falls upon the supervisory personnel. But I think as the lead investigator, if you're the lead investigator in a serial murder, the pressure is very much on. These cases are in the news media every day, and the pressure from above is pretty great. Yeah. But most of us would be relegated to support, doing whatever leads they give you. You come in and they go, hey, check this out, or go talk to this person, or get these records, or whatever it is.
Yeah. And is there a lot of, and if that is the case, because you get the impression from watching TV and true crime things that this does happen, the jurisdictional aspect of that was your case now, but no, and that's now ours, and we're taking over, and we're running the show, and is there any sort of angst between obviously the lead detective at the time and then these guys that were almost like parachuted in on the task force?
It doesn't happen as often as Hollywood would have you believe.
Right. Okay.
It really doesn't. There's no such thing as for example, the FBI coming in and going, okay, we're taking this over.
Right.
They normally don't handle murders anyway, so they only handle homicides that involve that happen on some federal territory or a federal facility or something like that.
Yeah.
So we dealt with them kind of on a cooperative basis when it came to mutual witnesses or mutual targets that we were looking at. For example, they might be working a big interstate fraud or interstate trucking case, and then there's a murder involved in that. Right. So now we have to cooperate and communicate with each other. But very rarely does anybody come in and say, "Hey, that's our jurisdiction." Jurisdiction is pretty clear cut.
Yeah.
And Stuart's been in touch again. He wants to ask a question. He says, have you ever dealt with any famous cases?
Yeah, I have. I worked on a couple of them. We had, well, to start with, we had the Colombian cartel murders, which most of them were in Miami. And most of them were actually connected to Griselda Blanco and her group of people, right. The godmother of cocaine. I think Netflix recently had a show about that. So I worked on that. I actually worked with Griselda Blanco's hitman when he turned into a state witness for us against her. Had a lot of contact with him. I worked on the Whitey Bulger case up in Boston and was part of that task force because one of their murders was in Miami. And I ended up inheriting that murder after the lead investigator had retired. And that thing broke open in the late 90s, and we got involved in that. I worked a long time on that as well.
Yeah. Wow, that's pretty impressive.
A question I'm dying to ask, and in a way, I hope the answer is no, but in a way, I sort of hope it's yes as well. Have you ever been sort of in the line of fire as such? Have you had sort of occasions where you've been sort of shot at, or have you ever had to sort of raise your gun to somebody else?
I've been shot at twice. Both times were in uniform.
Right.
And one of them was during a riot situation where we had these race riots going on, and it was just chaos. So I got those two attempts on my life out of the way in my first year. So thankfully that didn't ever happen again. Drawn my gun to get control of somebody several times. Yeah, that's not terribly uncommon if you're making an arrest and you feel like the person's armed, or you're serving an arrest warrant and the guy is a killer, for example. Sure.
Yeah. What's just rather than sort of the drawing the gun side of it, that first part where you say, I don't know. I think if I've been shot at twice in the first year of my career,
I'd be thinking of another career.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. It would cross my mind. It would definitely cross my mind. But what's that like? What's that like knowing that you're under fire? Do you go home and think that could have been it today?
Yeah, I've contemplated that more than once. The riots were such a chaotic time that you go home and you were talking earlier about going to sleep. It takes several tall boys and a few cigarettes to get to sleep after a night like that. So it's you don't dwell on it, but yeah, there's times you realize it, especially when you've seen other mates, as it were, getting killed on the job and other officers dying in the line of duty. You can't help but think back on the times that came close.
Wow. Did you see much of that then? Did you see? I don't want to pull up any sort of painful memories, but did you see any of your fellow officers hit and damaged in the line of duty?
Yes, I saw several. I would say 2 or 3 officers that were wounded, that were friends of mine that I worked with. A couple of 2 of my good friends. I'm sorry, one of my very good friends was killed in the line of duty during a bank robbery. And then we had the son of one of our lieutenants in homicide who was working uniform, got killed one night, and I worked on that case. So, if you work in this line of work for as long as I did, it's bound to happen. You're going to come across it.
Yeah, imagine. Gee whiz. Very, very different to the lives that we lead, isn't it? Yeah, very, very different to the lives that we lead. Funnily enough, so we had a guest on last week. The Dave, who sometimes or usually presents the podcast with us, can't be with us tonight, unfortunately. His brother moved to the States 20 years now. He's been living there, and we spoke to him about what it's like with firearms and what his opinion is on firearms, and obviously it's a different take when you're brought up in England. So Stuart is intrigued. He'd like to know what firearm were you issued? What firearm did you use?
Well, when I came out of the police academy, they issued us Ruger stainless steel 38 caliber revolvers. We shot revolvers back in 1979, and we didn't go to semi-automatic weapons until about the mid to late 80s. And at that time, they allowed us to carry any 9mm firearm that we could qualify at the range with. So I carried a Smith & Wesson 5906 for most of my career, just about all of my career.
Yeah, right. And it just, one thing that obviously has sort of caught the attention probably of the global news, but in the UK in particular, is obviously the issues surrounding Trump recently and the assassination attempt, and obviously the fact he got injured and got nicked on the ear and stuff. Have you ever been involved in anything sort of politically motivated like that? And also, I suppose the second part to a question is, what's it like in America now post that Trump sort of assassination attempt? Because from the UK, it now looks like he's an absolute, if he wasn't before, he's now even more of a shoo-in to get the job, basically. So I suppose it's two-part question, really. The first one, have you ever been involved in anything politically motivated and orientated like that? And then the second thing is, what is it like in the States at the moment after the Trump attempt?
I have not personally been involved in any politically motivated homicides.
Right.
We did have a number of those in the late 70s and early 80s that involved Cuban operatives and people involved in organizations that were trying to liberate Cuba and things like that. There were some of those things. We had some bombings in the late 70s in Miami, but that was before I came. That was before I came on the job.
Okay.
And as far as the atmosphere here in the United States, I think everybody's still engaged in a lot of rhetoric back and forth, and I think it's fair to say that Trump's followers are even more encouraged and empowered by what happened. Personally, I just think it's horribly sad that any candidate has to dodge a bullet or get shot in the ear or whatever it is. Yeah. We're not supposed to be that kind of a nation, and so it's an embarrassment, in my opinion, that it has to happen.
Yeah, and you know, to be fair, I think Biden came out and sort of said that, you know, politically, whether you agree or disagree, you know, nobody should, as you've just said there, you know, nobody should be in a position where they're having to sort of dodge a bullet. And let's not forget that actually somebody did lose their life. Yeah. You know, and that's the absolute travesty in it, I suppose. And it leads me on to a question, and I'm absolutely fascinated by this, and I ask most Americans when they come onto the podcast, sort of where do you sit? What's your stance on the sort of the gun laws and the gun lobby, and where are you in that? Because a lot of Americans are like, we have the right to take up arms to defend ourselves, but then a lot of people are saying, but the fact there's so many guns in circulation, that's the issue in itself. So I'm just from an American citizen point of view, but B, more so from a cop point of view, I suppose. Where's your thoughts on that?
Complicated question, but that's okay.
Sorry about that.
Personally, no, that's all right. It's a complicated issue. I don't think it's that simple an issue. I believe that people have that Second Amendment right, that freedom to own firearms. By the same token, I think that there are laws or absence of laws in some areas, in some states, that make it too easy for people to attain firearms. And I think we have a mental health issue in this problem in this country. And I think, to me, having investigated lots of murders and lots of crimes, if someone wants to hurt you or kill you, they're going to do it, whether they get a gun or a knife or a baseball bat, whatever. They're going to do it. Yeah. And if someone wants to get a firearm, you can outlaw it all day long. They're going to get a firearm because the black market is there, and it's always been there, and it will always be there. So I don't see banning firearms as the answer. I think that instead we need to work on better educating society so that, you know, we have a more sane populace.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree with that. As soon as you strip something away, you almost and you make it, you criminalize it, it just goes underground, and then it just the black market flourishes. And as you said, you know, if you want to do something, you want to get your hands on something, there are ways and means, and you're going to do that. So I suppose almost legislatively, if that's even a word, you know, make it tight, make sure that the legality of owning various things is tight, and it goes to the right people. As you said, you know, the mental health issue is a significant one, and I think you put the right checks in place to check that the people are right to own the firearm in the first place, etc., etc., etc. So I think that's for me, that's a great answer, and I think that would be my stance on it: is don't get rid of them completely, because people are still going to get them, but just make sure that the right people have the right capacity to own them, if that's the case, I suppose.
Yeah, I think also the shooting, the assassination attempt on Trump is kind of a microcosm of my answer, because the guy had an AR-15, but first of all, we should have prevented him from climbing on that roof. Well, why wasn't that prevented? And I'm not just blatantly throwing blame on the Secret Service. I've never been a Secret Service agent. Their job is very difficult. But, in the same realm, we have lots and lots of guns in this country. If you ban guns tomorrow, there's still hundreds of thousands of guns out there in communities. So instead, we have to try and keep people from using them irresponsibly, and that's almost impossible, right? It's almost impossible, unless you end up with a police state where you're searching people on the highway and pulling over their cars, and we don't live like that.
No.
One of the things we need to do while you're here as well is give a quick shout out to Vic Ferrari, who put you in touch with us. God bless him. I said we're going to have to give him credit as a booking agent if he keeps getting us all his guests.
I know he'll be after commission soon.
He will be. Yeah, we after a cut, and God bless him, we'll have to give him one. So one of the other guys he put us in touch with as well was a guy called John Farisso, who was a New York police officer, and he worked in internal affairs. So obviously he made himself quite unpopular for a spell, but. Did you see much? Did you see? Okay, you got to be careful how you answer this. I guess I'm putting you on the spot here. Did you see much corruption? Did you see much? Well, Hollywood lets us believe there's always bad cops. Did you see much of that?
Well, yeah, we saw some. We had a case where it was actually a pretty huge case in South Florida, where the city of Miami police officers. Now that's a different department from the one I worked. I worked in the county. City of Miami officers were ripping off drug dealers and ended up killing 3 of them. And that was a massive investigation. I came in on the tail end of it after it happened, just before I got to homicide. But that was an investigation that lasted years and ended up with, I think, 12 or 13 officers getting indicted and ultimately convicted. And then, there's always small scale stuff. I mean, police officers are human beings, and they're going to screw up. They're going to try and get over the system. Some of them, I would like to think that law enforcement has less of that element than the rest of society. But there was always something going on. I mean, I worked a case one time where we got a confession from a guy that was participated in an armed robbery, turned out to be a murder. And during his confession, he said, "Hey, I know of a cop who's tipping off people to search warrants." So then we had to go to internal affairs and talk to them about that, and pretty much introduce them to our suspect there. And so those things are always ongoing, and it's unfortunate when I hear stories about cops that just do really stupid things to try and get around the rules, and it's a shame, because it makes us all look bad.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Well, one question, and it goes back to what you mentioned earlier about, and I think you said almost when you'd first sort of joined and you went down to Florida, and to me, the route from South America through into North America, and the drugs trade and everything that goes, I'm assuming, and we always get the impression that Florida was actually a key state, and that was a major route into America, sort of thing. Was it predominantly from South America? So you mentioned like the Colombian cartels and this. Was it predominantly from South America that you were dealing with, or with aspects from elsewhere? And what was that process of trying to just root out? And I suppose the routes that they were taking, and then obviously the people behind it. Just a little bit of background on that, really.
Right. Well, Florida was the perfect spot for entry of anything coming from South America. And yes, it was predominantly in the 80s, particularly the cocaine cartels were all based in Colombia. Bolivia was involved to a certain extent with some of the farming and the processing and all those things. But most of that was coming from Colombia. There were staging points all over the Caribbean and Latin America. There were freighters that would stop in Honduras and pick up things or deliver things to Honduras to smaller vessels. And, it was wide open. And before law enforcement really got a chance to catch up and get any traction on it, it was coming in everywhere. And if you look at the coast of Florida, we've got hundreds, maybe thousands of miles of coastline completely uncharted coastline. That any nooks and crannies where you can get in with a small boat, and yeah, it was all over the place.
Wow. And what sort of, and you might not know the answer to this, but what sort of figures are you? I mean, I'm assuming you're talking like multiple hundreds of millions of dollars of turnover, just literally just flooding into the States, I suppose.
Oh, definitely. It was staggering how much money was coming into the streets of Miami. And if you've ever watched the show Cocaine Cowboys, if you haven't seen that, I recommend it. One of them, I think it was John Roberts, one of the guys interviewed in that show. He said, we were pulling in a couple $1 million a week.
Wow.
And this is in the 80s. And, just kind of, you got to sit there and get your calculator out and start saying that I don't even know what that looks like. I mean, and some of these guys were talking, I think it was, again, Roberts, who said, I had money stacked in my 2-car garage to the ceiling and I ran out of space. So yeah, it was just ridiculous how much money was on the street. And, that really gave rise to a lot of cottage industry crime, because when you have that much cash in the street, you've got a lot more ripoffs. And these people knew that kilos were coming in and being sold for 40, 50, 60,000 a kilo. So why don't we just rip this guy off and kill him? He's got $1 million sitting in his car. Let's take him out.
Wow.
And that happened a lot.
Wow, imagine it's a lifestyle. You have to understand in our very leafy little town that we live here in Cheshire that we can't even begin to get our heads around. Wow. So
it was the atmosphere in Miami at that time was, and again, in your neighborhood or even before all this started, you're driving down the street and you see a car with both doors open. And you go, oh gosh, I hope nobody's hurt. Let me stop and see if maybe this guy's having a heart attack or he's having car problems.
Yeah.
In Miami, the first thing that we would think was, oh crap, what's going on here? Is this a shooting? Is this a robbery? What's happening? That's the first thing that crossed our minds. So we all got very, very cynical very quickly over there.
And I suppose, and I don't know, you mentioned sort of the cocaine influx and stuff, that Florida was a pretty sort of chill place. It was a party place, and you'd go and do water sports and a family orientated. I suppose when the cocaine came in, there would be an influx of sort of major crime, petty crime on the back of that. But was there a sense that lots of people were just having a great time, and it was almost become party central, and there was lots and lots of money and a real affluence of people, basically showing off, it's like, look at me, I've got the money, and I suppose the whole vibe of the city would have, the state, I suppose, would have just changed completely.
It really was. And what you said is very true, that, cocaine, especially in the powdered form, which is really how it was being sold and delivered most of the time, was a cool, chic thing to have, right? And what they talk about, these stories of people snorting coke off the tabletops in restaurants, it's true. There were certain places that you could do that without anybody saying a word. And that was the kind of the glitz and glamour. And if you were a young guy and you had a vial of coke, you might really get on with the ladies that night, so it was that kind of thing. But the other side of that was very ugly. The other side was when people started changing the powdered form into a paste form, which we called freebasing. It was called freebasing back then, and it later turned into crack cocaine. It was really kind of the same stuff. That's highly, highly addictive, and that was what we saw more in the ghettos, and that was where we saw people turning into zombies, and the crime was going out through the roof. And, young women were turning into prostitution just so they could support their habits. And it changed a lot of neighborhoods. It wasn't all glitz and glamour at all.
No, you can imagine. You can't imagine, but yeah, gee whiz, it does affect people's lives terribly. I have to say, though, hearing all this and knowing that you did, your job for as long as you did do it, there must have been parts you enjoyed. I'm sure there were parts you didn't enjoy. I'd be curious to know what they were. What was your favorite part of the job? What was your least favorite part of the job?
Favorite part of the job in terms of homicide investigation, I guess, would be that that thrill, that feeling you got when your case started taking on momentum, when you started getting, okay, this guy, now we got this guy to focus on. It looks like he's our guy, and we got enough to get a search warrant, and boom, we go do the search warrant, and we're finding the goods, we're finding a gun. That's a thrill. It's a slow thrill, but the excitement starts to mount, and there's nothing like that when you finally can put the cuffs on them and get them charged. It's a good feeling. I guess also the camaraderie, as you spoke of before, of being able to experience that with your squad members makes that extra special. It's a team effort.
Yeah.
So, so that's I think what I enjoyed the most about detective work.
Yeah. And you mentioned there, it like the thrill is a little bit of a slow burner almost, but has there ever been a case where, I suppose, not necessarily out of thin air, but you find the smoking bullet or you find the smoking gun or whatever it is, and you think, that moment, and you might go for a search, you think that's it, and I suppose that surge of adrenaline, it's like, yeah, we've got him now. That's the nail in the coffin that we need. That's the beyond reasonable doubt or whatever, and I suppose that must be like an amazing feeling where you put all this time and effort in, and then all of a sudden you get the piece of evidence that you need, or you get the witness statement or whatever it may be, and you go bang, boom, that's it. That must be feeling
100%.
amazing.
It is. It's and you mentioned, witness statements, and when you get a confession from somebody as well, that's a tremendous feeling of accomplishment. And we got to do that a lot. And when that momentum is happening and your case is starting to really pick up steam, you look at the clock and you go, holy crap, we've been working 22 hours. You didn't even realize it.
Really? Wow.
And only later do you get tired when you get home. But then, back then we were young, we could 4 hours sleep and we'd be back to work, getting back on the case. So there was always something to do.
And do American cops drink as much coffee as everybody makes out that they drink? Because like on TV, you just see them constantly drinking coffee.
I would say that's accurate.
Pretty accurate.
Fair play. Fair play. So you took these stories that you over your career, and obviously you put them in a book, Badge, Tie and Gun, Life and Death Journeys of a Miami Detective. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the book, the work that you put into it, and maybe some of your favorite stories that are in it?
Yeah, the book, I always liked to write. I always used to write when I was a kid. It was just something that I always liked to do. It was my outlet, I guess you could say. So, a year or two into police work, I knew I was going to be writing about it. I didn't really have any designs on a book per se, but I used to write down, I would used to take notes sometimes. I would come home and just, wow, that case was incredible. And I'd write down some notes, keep it in a notebook. And it wasn't until after I retired that I thought, I really need to start working on a book.
Yeah.
And it was an off and on procedure. It was, I would get busy with other things. I was always working. I was working full time as a teacher. And so it took 8 years of, starting and stopping, editing and re-editing. Took pretty much 8 years to get it done. So it felt good to finally do that. It was like closing a case. Like, boom, I'm done.
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet. And can you share some of your favorite stories like that, or at least give people a little bit of a taster if they do go and purchase the book?
Yeah, there was a point where I had to stop writing because I realized, God, this book is getting long and it's getting too big. So I didn't really include a lot of stories, but the ones that I think the ones that stand out, I told you about the one where we never were able to solve the death of that heavy equipment guy.
Yeah.
And I didn't mind writing about the failures we had too. I didn't want to just have a book full of successes. I wanted people to read it and understand what the process was and what it felt like to do that job. That was one that took up, I think, a better part of a chapter there. I had a case where we found a crashed airplane out in the Everglades, and a guy's body about 300 yards north of the plane, covered with branches. And so, that was 1985 or 86 rather. And it took about 2 weeks. We were trying to identify this guy. It turned out to be a high school friend of mine. And so that was that was a case that really took up a lot of my energy and focus. And we uncovered a group of smugglers, and it was a very difficult case. We were able to identify a lot of people, but never able to charge them with the actual felony murder or manslaughter involved in what we pretty sure was a smuggling venture. So, but that was a unique situation for me to be investigating the death of a friend, and it was sad, but it was also there was a certain energy I put into that. There's others. There was a case. I don't want to give away too much, but there was a case that where we found a guy shot in the head, kind of out on the edge of town, and that involved the death of a kitten. And the motive was actually someone's kitten was killed, and I'm not going to say how. It's a very unusual story, and it takes up I think an entire chapter in the book actually. So there's a bunch of stories like that. I tried to pick out the most compelling ones, the ones that were the most bizarre, kind of those you can't make this stuff up kind of case.
Yeah, I can imagine. Like I say, we will share a link to this book to where you can purchase it. Like I say, if you're in the UK, you can purchase it, but I can tell you from my own experience, it takes a little while to get there. But it is Amazon Prime Day today, folks. So if you are watching, get involved, jump on Amazon and pick this book up. Gaz, did you have a question there? Sorry.
Yeah, no, it was just more really, you mentioned in the book that you didn't just want to do this sort of story after story. You wanted to tell, I suppose, in a way, how heavy it weighs on you as a person when you're trying to, and that very personable sort of approach to the book. And it's not all, oh, well, there was this case and this silly thing happened and this silly thing happened, and not silly, that's the wrong phrase, but a strange or weird case. I suppose more the human factor and how much it weighed upon you, and actually the fact that you put a couple in there that actually you didn't get to solve, and what that meant to you, and not the baggage as such, but how heavy it weighs upon you. That must be, in a way, a little bit liberating for you to write about it, but also from the reader's point of view, quite chastising, just in terms of how much it affected you, and actually then thinking about the human cost and the cost it is to you in terms of walking around with the knowledge that you didn't quite get to the point where you wanted to get to. So I'm just fascinated that you decided to put that in the book, which is, from my point of view, amazing, because it's that personable approach to it and what it meant to you as a person.
Yeah, I mean, the purpose of the book was not to look at me, rah rah. I was a detective. That I wanted people to see the realities of the job. I wanted to kind of pull back the curtain and show people stuff that they don't see in Hollywood. That's never portrayed in Hollywood. Give a very quick example. We had to take jewelry off of bodies before they got transported to the morgue. That was the procedure. You never let the morgue take the medical examiner take the body with any jewelry on it. Well, sometimes these were decomposed bodies, and it was not the most pleasant task in the world to be taking off a necklace and a pair of earrings from a decomposed body. And then you had to return those items to the family. That was the detective's job. This is something you never see on TV or in Hollywood. So we had a tradition. It wasn't written down anywhere, but the tradition was you washed off that jewelry, you scrubbed it clean before you gave it back to those people.
Yeah.
Out of respect. And I can tell you, there were times you'd go in the men's room and here would be a couple of detectives standing at a sink with a toothbrush, brushing a bracelet, getting the skin and hair off a bracelet and making sure it didn't smell that bad before we gave it back to the families.
Wow.
And so that was something that I don't know if you find that kind of atmosphere or that kind of endeavor in any other kind of work.
Yeah.
But we were driven by trying to satisfy the families in that way, and trying to show respect to the families as much as we could.
Yeah. And a sense of what is right and just and respectful, and the things you've just said, and if you were to see that in a Hollywood film or a documentary, whatever, you perhaps would see the body with the jewelry, and then you would see it being handed back to the family, but you wouldn't see the process in between that of actually the detectives taking the time to actually ensure that that respect is there and that process has continued. So you might see the end point of them going, "Oh, thank you very much for returning the ring," or whatever, but you don't see they would never show that. So I mean, I didn't know that.
No.
I genuinely didn't know that, and that I suppose just goes to show how, in a way, how invested some people would become in a case, and I suppose doing the right thing and doing the right thing by the right people.
Yeah, fair play.
A couple of people have told me that I had a guy yesterday tell me, this should be turned into a movie miniseries, and I was very flattered by that.
Yeah.
But it got me thinking, and I thought to myself, I suddenly flashed into the opening scene, and the opening scene is a detective wearing a tie, standing over a sink, brushing a piece of jewelry with a toothbrush, and people would be going, "What on earth is happening here?"
Yeah.
But that's that's just emblematic of the other side, the unseen side of that kind of work.
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that would be the opening scene to that book when it was made into a movie. But this isn't the first book you've written, is it? Do you want to tell us about the title of the other book that you wrote?
Yeah, the other one is really so different than Badge Time Gun. It was really written, believe it or not, as a handbook, a guide, a how-to book for private investigators. Because when I retired from police work, I opened my own private investigation agency. I had some people working for me, and I noticed one of them was not really up to speed on writing reports that well. So I put together a quick little 2-page thing for him on how to write a good report. And then I thought, I should put together a training thing for these detectives. And that just turned into a book.
Right.
It just went into it's called The 10 Must-Haves to Be a Great Detective. And it's a very short book. It's not in any way like Badge Time Gun. It's a completely different voice.
Yeah. I tell you what, though, I'll be keeping an eye out for that. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Did you want to tell us a little bit then about, just briefly before you go, Nyberg Security and Investigations? Then you have your own PI business now. Tell us what that entails.
Right. Well, again, Hollywood and social media would have you believe that private investigators are always skulking around in bushes and chasing cheating spouses and all that. And I guess there's a certain amount of that. Most work that private investigators do is pretty upfront. You're working for personal injury attorneys. They're always looking for, they need a witness statement, or they need to find some paperwork, or they need information. And so it's not all cloak and dagger type stuff. It's pretty much whatever these attorneys need to put their cases together, and they don't have the time or the legal basis to do it. They can't interview witnesses themselves because they can't be. There's laws about that. So, I've done a fair amount of that. I've scaled back recently because I've been teaching full time and enjoying that. So I don't take a lot of cases anymore, but I still have the company.
And what, just a question there, what is it that you're teaching?
So I'm teaching high school, believe it or not. I'm teaching here in, I don't know if they have this in England, but we actually have a criminal justice curriculum in Florida public schools. So I teach criminal justice, and, I get to teach them about investigations, about police departments, how they work, about how our courts work and all that. So I enjoy that. I really do enjoy that.
Wow. Yeah, we don't have that sort of curriculum over here, I suppose. Yes, we do quite a lot on. We might do crime and punishment, and we might do sort of the UK legislative system and all of that. But in terms of getting in and it being part of the sort of the state curriculum, we don't have that. So I was just fascinated by what it was, and I wondered whether or not it would be something sort of cop based as opposed to, I don't know, you're going to go and teach art or something, because that was like a thing growing up or whatever. I don't know. And I was just fascinated because you mentioned it a couple of times that you now teach. So, and it's something obviously you clearly enjoy now.
I do, and I also work for a company that maybe 3 or 4 times a year I teach law enforcement accredited classes for law enforcement, regional law enforcement. I teach homicide investigation and interview techniques. So
Wow.
those have, it's a company that connects with law enforcement in service training. So those have, since COVID, those have gone mostly remote.
No, fair play. In terms of your high school studies, I know somebody would have enjoyed that. Be your daughter, Amy, wouldn't it?
Oh yeah, my sort of my eldest daughter, she's 19. And I sort of joke she'll either be a serial killer or she'll be a a cop. She absolutely loves true crime. She's studying criminology at university, and she sort of said, oh, I'd love to go work for the FBI, and I was like, well, there's a problem with that. You've got to be American citizens, so unless you're going to go over there and you're going to. But she's fascinated by the I suppose the profiling and what makes a person do what they do. So I suppose that nature nurture. What is it? What are the decisions that make? Is it environmental? Is it social? What are the reasons that those people make those decisions to do those things? And she's honestly she's fascinated. She's on a holiday at the moment, but otherwise she'd have probably been texting me saying, "Oh my god, ask this." And I know when Vic came on, she listened to a couple of episodes that Vic was on, and she's like, "He's my new favorite guy," sort of thing. But yeah, she's absolutely like fascinated with it. Any true crime on Netflix or anything to do with serial killers or like homicide cases, she's absolutely all over. So yeah, she would have loved that course that you're doing.
And listen,
I was
going to say, Amy, I teed him up to wish you happy birthday, but he didn't do it anyway, so I'll wish you happy birthday for sure.
Well, to be fair, where she is now, it's probably after her birthday because she's actually in sort of Komodo, so it's actually sort of tomorrow now where she is. But yes, Amy, if you are listening, then I hope you have a fantastic birthday.
Oh, it's my son's birthday too, so there we go.
There you go. Then.
Going to wish him happy birthday.
Many happy returns, and I hope you have a fantastic day.
Oh, yeah, fair play. So we're round about the hour mark now. So do you want to sum it up for us? Do you want to leave a final thought? But definitely tell people where they can pick up your book.
Sure. Final thoughts. I think we just finished talking about teaching, and one of the things I enjoy about teaching is the students come in with a lot of myths and a lot of misperceptions. Again, you've heard me talk about Hollywood and how people are conditioned to think a certain way about law enforcement, about our courts, and unfortunately, our students, our young people, don't know that much about it. They don't have adequate enough information to be good, knowledgeable citizens to make good decisions when they go to the voting polls. I like to think that I'm a part of that, right? I like to think that them understanding our Constitution and the way our courts work is important to them. So in the same way, the reason I bring that up, that's partially the voice in my book as well. I think most people don't really understand the inner workings of a police department, an investigative unit like homicide. And why should they? It's not portrayed that well, and it's not portrayed that accurately in Hollywood. So I'm proud of that fact that I have that out there, that people can hopefully learn from it as well, besides being entertained. I put a lot of my personal anecdotes from my childhood in the book as well. I don't want to get too long-winded here, but there was a lot of incidents and lessons I learned as a kid that seemed to crop up as an adult. And so I tie those in the book. So there's several flashbacks to that. And that ended up being kind of the theme of the book in a way. But anyway, I really enjoyed our talk, and I hope your audience was able to get something out of it and enjoyed it. And the book is called Badge, Tie, and Gun: Life and Death Journeys of a Miami Detective. It's on Amazon as a ebook or paperback. You can also get it at barnesandnoble.com. I don't know if you have that there, if you can get that in England, barnesandnoble.com, the bookstore. And a local bookstore here in Miami just agreed to carry the book. And so I'm pretty excited about that. We're going to be doing a book signing in a couple of weeks.
That's cool.
That's amazing.
Cool. Yeah, definitely, guys. What, sum it up for us, dude.
Oh, look, I said it right at the start. I love episodes where we have guests on, new guests. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting. I've loved every minute of it. It's an hour and 5 minutes in. It's flown by, and there's so many of the questions we could have asked. There's so many different things we could have gone down, avenues we could have gone down. We say this to I say we say it to all of our guests. We don't say it to all of our guests because some of them are crap, if I'm honest. But and you've not been one of them, obviously. But we'd love to have you back on again, just to explore just different aspects of the job and what it meant. And we said the same to Vic, and we always love getting Vic back on. We'll give him another shout out. But look, if you ever did want to come back on, we'd love to have you back on again.
Well, thank you. I would love to do it again.
Yeah, it's been an absolute joy from my point of view, and I can't thank you enough for spending the time. And I know you're busy moving house and this, that, and the other. So again, we really, really appreciate it, and I can't wait till the next time.
Yeah, my pleasure. And next time I'll have my beer. You guys may be thirsty, so
yeah, 2 in the afternoon or whatever it is over at your place. Might be a bit early, whereas for us it's like 8 in the evening. So
we're on vacation still. Yeah.
Oh, okay. There you go.
There you go. Yeah. So that wraps it up for us again. Head over to Amazon.com if you're here in the UK. You can order it. It will get delivered, especially if you're on Prime. There is no delivery charge for that. You can get it on the paperback version, or you can get it in Kindle, which unfortunately I don't have. So I've ordered the paperback, and I cannot tell you how much I am looking forward to reading it when it does arrive. So thank you very much, Ramesh. We've really enjoyed having you. I'll echo what Gaz says. You're welcome on anytime. We'd love to have you back on again. The stuff that that we would have loved to ask you, we just simply haven't had time. But again, thank you to you. Thank you to Vic for making this happen again. God bless you. We appreciate it. And we will see you next week when we will be talking about something entirely different again.
Thank you, guys.